Executive Director of the French American Foundation in the US. I'm really honored to introduce this new Young Leaders Perspective talk. Welcome and thank you to our two speakers, Leslie Serrero and Siddhartha Shukla, who will be discussing the fashion industry during times of crisis. Times of tumult can be times of creativity for many industries, and we are excited to hear about how the fashion industry, like many industries, is adapting to change. The French American Foundation has always been about building bridges between France and the United States, and our Young Leaders program is one of the ways we have been doing this. With the current COVID-19 situation in the world, like the fashion industry, I'm sure, the two foundations have had to adapt to a new way of building these bridges, and our online digital talks between young leaders and alumni are a great way to reinvent ourselves while creating new content. Our partnership with our sister organization is stronger than ever, and I would like to thank Christophe Labard, Amina, and the team in France and my team for this. Our two wonderful speakers will dive into the discussion, and I have the pleasure of introducing both of them. So Leslie Serrero is a 2013 young leader. She is currently General Manager of Fendi for France and Monaco. In that role, she manages the company P&L in the region with a strong growth objective. Before taking her current role, she was Senior Vice President of Global Client Development, Marketing and E-Retail at Christian Dior Couture, reporting to the CEO. She is sitting on several boards, including Laiterie Hubert Tribaya, Groupe Biasphère, and the Harvard Business School Club of France. And since 2019, she's on the executive committee of the French American Foundation France. So thank you, Leslie, for being here with us today.
Thank you, delighted to be here.
Good. Siddhartha Shukla, my friend Siddhartha, my dear friend, is a 2016 young leader. He's a fashion industry executive who has worked in New York and Paris with Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, and Rit Krakow prior to joining Fast Retailing as Chief Marketing Officer in 2013. He's now the Chief Brand Officer, where he oversees product strategy, business development, marketing and communication initiative for Theory and Edmund Lang globally. Siddhartha sits on the board of the Metropolitan Opera and the Salzburg Easter Festival, and is a member of the board of directors of the French American Foundation, United States. So if we have any young leader and alumni in the public, this is the goal. You are a young leader, then you become an alumni, and then you become a board member, and then you become an executive committee member of the foundation. That's what we aim for. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. Leslie and Siddhartha will take your question. You can write them in the Q&A section, and they will take your question as they come. Now, Leslie, Siddhartha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emmeline.
Thank you.
We're delighted to be here today, and delighted to also see that the foundation is organizing this kind of event to connect all of us during this period, which has raised so many challenges, both professionally and personally. And so this is a great way of connecting and of encouraging dialogue in this most challenging of times. I decided that I would start only because I had the opportunity to speak yesterday with Leslie. We were chatting as she was moving between Fendi stores in Paris, on the ground, doing the frontline job of fashion, where in this moment, in this incredibly tenuous moment, an engagement on the front line with clients at the store level is the most critical thing. And so it was an interesting moment of sharing with Leslie while I was still in a kind of confinement in the countryside in America. And we were discussing quickly what we might share today. And I remembered meeting Leslie. We met my first year as a young leader. It was in Lille, I think. And you had come in from Paris on a Saturday night to have dinner with all of the young leaders. And I remember being so excited to meet you. Some of my fellow young leaders and certainly some of the members from the French side of the foundation had mentioned you were coming, and I was particularly excited to meet somebody after an intense few days with brilliant people in fields other than my own, to meet somebody from the fashion world. And so it was a delight to meet Leslie, and that was almost 4 years ago. And since then, you've had a really interesting change in your career. Mine has changed, but within the same company. You've stayed within the same group. And one of the things we discussed yesterday, Leslie and I, is that on the first hand, we don't really have any clear answers. And today is not about delivering answers. We all, I think, but certainly those of us in a sector like retail, that is like luxury and retail, that is having to bounce back in this moment of incredible incertitude, and where the profile, the psychology, and the reality of our consumer is completely radically changing. But instead of delivering any sort of concrete answers, and in the face of a lot of uncertainty, Leslie and I thought it would be interesting to just share some of the things we're thinking about and the ways that we are pivoting ourselves, our teams, and our businesses in order to be best prepared for the months and seasons to come. And the three things that emerged, and I think that's where I will leave it to Leslie to elaborate, but the three things that really emerged for us were, first, this question of values. And luxury and fashion and great brands have always been built on a kaleidoscope of values. But those values have always been about, or tended to always have been about, heritage and roots and the essential DNA of a company as connected to its products. And I think one of the things Leslie and I are interested in talking about are values that are perhaps a bit more current, values that might be personal values, and how are the personal and brand values connected in a moment where the customer wants to know more than just the history of your brand, but also wants to know what you represent today and what is your value system today. The second thing we spoke about was governance, which I think is an incredibly important issue for any sort of enterprise, any sort of corporation today, in how we are navigating the moral, ethical, and social responsibility of being an organization that employs people, that has important operating structures, and has shareholders in many cases. And how are we addressing our internal culture through a newly imagined system of governance? This is about diversity, this is about inclusion, this is about bias. And these are obviously issues that are coming out of recent events that have started really in the United States. And the third thing, and it's as important today as it is ever, and it's really where I think Leslie's job today is so interesting, is in the space of creative leadership and entrepreneurship. And you might think that, again, that was always something that was important in fashion, and it's important in any business. But I think in this moment, Leslie and I, we both work for among the biggest fashion groups in the world. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to every day approach our business as entrepreneurs. And I think, Leslie, that's my segue to you, because you, as I said earlier, are on the ground and dealing with your business firsthand right now.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Thank you all. I'm super excited to be here and super excited to get to spend some time with Siddhartha again 4 years down the road. So we had a great encounter in Lille. So it's nice, we met again a couple of times in between, but it's nice to spend that time together. I think, yes, the three topics are clearly super important. What values do we want to share? And I think it's both internally and externally with our consumer. What internal culture do we create, or how do we evolve our culture? And then for sure, how do we create structures where I think the brands who will win in this era of high volatility are those that can be super agile. And I tell my teams, we have to be agile, we have to learn every day, we have to adapt, we have to be faster than everybody else. We have to test, learn fast if we fail, and get up again. And I think it goes back to having this entrepreneurship mindset. I think it's super important. I think it's important all the time. But I think in times of crisis, for me, what's key to win is making sure that I have on the ground team that think as entrepreneurs. I think just to give you some context, I took over this subsidiary of Fendi. Fendi is an Italian luxury brand. So I took the subsidiary in France, and I decided after 7 years at Dior, where I was in a relatively beautiful and comfortable job, to take on a new challenge because it was a business. Fendi is doing well, was doing well around the world, but France had been struggling for the last 3 years. And I thought, well, it's great to show that I can have an impact and help turn around a business. Little did I know that 4 months down the road, I would have 2 months of strikes in Paris, or in France actually, so it hit the business hard, and then the COVID crisis. So clearly a testing moment. I thought that going through those different points, I would share for me what's interesting and thinking about the challenges that we face today in our industry and how we're adapting. In a very short amount of time, we've been already through 3 phases of this crisis. I want to say there was a pre-lockdown crisis, the pre-lockdown time. And being in luxury, we felt at the end of January, and I was in France, we had, it was the end of 2 months heavy strike. So we had already less traffic and less tourism because of the 2 months heavy strikes. And usually the end of January and February, or at least when that happens, we have the Chinese New Year period, and it's a big, important peak of sales for the luxury industry. However, the virus hit China very hard then. That's when they started implementing the lockdown. And suddenly we were faced, even before it hit us, and it took us another month to realize really what was happening from a country standpoint. But we already started to feel that there was a sudden drop in tourism. Now, if I think about luxury in Europe, slightly probably different in the US and again different in Asia, but in Europe, luxury is highly dependent on tourism and has been for the last 20 years. At Fendi, we are probably a bit less dependent on Chinese than other brands, but we already start feeling that we had to think differently. I had to think about the team and convince the team that we had to win without those clients. And really be focused on the super client-centric, being on the floor all the time, engaging everybody who comes to the door. So we started seeing a decrease in tourism early February until the end of February. Having said that, I think that all the things that had been put in place in the previous 6 months, we ended up the first 2 months at plus 29%. So while I felt there was a crisis coming, when we started the week before the lockdown, I was still super positive that we would cruise through and it wouldn't be as bad as it turned out to be. And then on the 15th of March, overnight, basically, we learned that we had to close our stores. We found out on a Saturday night, which of course was super easy at 8 p.m., or at least I found out at 8 p.m. because I was out until 8 p.m. Had to basically call everybody in France and making sure we were ready for store closures. The first couple of days was all about how do we deal with closing stores so quickly? What do I do with the employees? I mean, I'm talking about around 170 people in France and Monaco. What do we do with inventory store? How do I make sure that, I mean, my store are not stolen in the meantime? So it's having everybody on the ground, thinking we need to remove all the products we have on the floor, put them in the basement. I had, and one of the intense experience was I had a team in Courchevel. And on the Sunday, I'm talking to them and we're thinking, okay, so we will close Courchevel earlier than we had planned. It's a store that's open 4 to 5 months a year. And on the Sunday, I'm talking to the team thinking, okay, how do we plan the inventory to make sure that we close the store clean? And then we have the truck pick up all the product on Thursday because it usually takes us about 3 days to do the inventory, organize the store. And then Sunday night, on Monday morning, the store manager calls me and said, all the other brands have disappeared. There's no one in the city. Everybody's freaking out. 2 of my client advisor, and it's a team of 6, or 3 of the client advisor have left because they freaked out with what's happening. What do we do? And I thought, I can't leave them alone there. I mean, it feels like it's a ghost city. So I told them, let's try to close as cleanly as we can, and you leave as soon. And it was actually a good timing because then it would have been tougher for them to leave the city and go back to your normal home. So they left. And so the first week, I mean, when you deal with retail team in Fendi, France, the headquarters is about 15 people. The other 150 are retail employees being in store. Then you're thinking, okay, how do I, and then we find out, we expected that it would be probably 1 to 2 months, 1.5 months to 2 months lockdown, but of course we didn't have that visibility. And so then we started thinking, okay, how am I organizing my teams remotely? People that, I mean, it's not office work, they're used to being in front of clients and suddenly they're left alone, not knowing what to do. The other thing is the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, where I think for everybody, I mean, it's a bit stressful thinking, what's happening? Are we all going to die? And I knew that in a retail workforce, a lot of my team members are young, often they live alone, they're far from their family. It's a super diverse workforce. So I have people from all over the world who have their family outside of France. And then I realized one of my responsibilities as a leader was also to make sure, other than keeping them engaged for Fendi, how do I make sure they don't go crazy, they don't go depressed? How do I still engage them? So we spent the next 2 months, we decided not to put anybody on furlough. We felt it was the right thing to do, which meant people were working and paid, or officially working and paid, being at home. So we put in place a lot of activities. I thought, well, it's a great opportunity to have them share best practices. So we basically started spending our lives, like all of you, on Teams and thinking, okay, I have somebody who's really good at selling exotic bags. So we organized a session where he would share his know-how. And so on. It was good to keep them engaged, train them on skills that would be necessary when we started reopening. And at the same time, having my best talent be put forward and recognize also that they could bring something to the others. And we organized training, and we had really, I mean, we organized like daily tasks over the full months of training, sharing best practices, team meetings, so we would keep them engaged, and of course, clienteling. How do we reach out to clients to let them know that we think about them? And really, for 1.5 months, I had all of my team members reaching to our clients around the world just to understand if everybody was okay, if they felt safe. It was not the time, and I felt very strongly, it wasn't the time to be commercial. It was the time to demonstrate that we had empathy and they were important to us, and we wanted to share that, which is what we did. Then at the same time, you go through those 1.5 months and you get used to these new habits. I made a point of over-communicating. So I was participating to every single, most team meetings. I organized with my direct reports, bi-weekly meetings as well to share on activities. But then it's also, you don't know what's tomorrow going to be like, and nobody has any idea, and we still don't know what's tomorrow going to be like. But how do you start preparing them for tomorrow? So we then move into that relatively comfortable phase where we have a calendar of things we have to do. We are at home. Some people live it well. For some people, it's really tough. And I had a few employees for whom it was really tough. So we made sure we were super close to them. But at the same time, how do I then make sure that we can restart when we're ready to restart? How can I also give them some sort of perspective of, okay, we are now in a crisis, but we will get out of this crisis and start to have a vision of where to go. And have them, and I really engaged all the teams, which was a unique opportunity because in retail it's tough when everybody's in store in different shifts, engaging them on how did they think that the world would be different tomorrow? What should we do differently? What would be customers' expectations? How should we evolve our product offer? And it was this unique opportunity to spend time hearing from all of them. And we got actually super interesting ideas that we then decided to put in place. And then starts the third phase, which is the reopening. So then we find out we need to reopen. And it's another level of anxiety because at the same time, we're super excited to be out of the lockdown. At the same time, what does it mean to be in store when you know there's still a virus going on? So the first concern was, how do we reassure the team that we're going to put everything in place so that it is as safe as possible, given what we know, for them to come back? And for that, we had a really big emphasis on safety procedures, for sure, both for our teams, but also for the clients. But then some other questions came up. How do I re-engage the teams that have been, even if they had some activity that had been off for 2 months? And some people after a while were thinking it's relatively comfortable. So how do I make sure that they feel that they want to come and they're excited to come, despite the fact that especially the first 2 weeks, they felt it was dangerous? Then how do we get prepared? How do we think the consumers are going to be different? And what we live today, which we expected, but as I've said, we're highly dependent on tourism. And suddenly, if I think that probably 80% of my consumers in a regular year are tourists from all over the world, I'm basically overnight losing 80% of my consumers. So then the question becomes, how do I train the team on the spot every day to re-engage local consumers because they behave differently? And how do I start recruiting new consumers when I have 80% less traffic? And then what are the customers' expectations? And Siddhartha talked about it, but how can they differ from the crisis? For sure, the importance of feeling safe. And for that, we had put everything in place and I felt relatively confident. But then I felt really strongly that consumers would go back to brands who had strong values. So we have beautiful product, but beyond the product, how do we communicate the values that we stand for? Fendi, the brand that was created in 1925. And so we've been around a lot of crises. We went through the Second World War, we came out of it, and we've survived and grown until then. So what can we learn from that experience? And how can we communicate that to our consumer? Of course, all the consumers that are coming to the store today, they can buy online, and we've seen a huge surge of shopping online. But they come because they want to feel engaged, they want to be pampered. Luxury is all about how do I make people dream? How do I help them to escape from that reality that's a bit morose? And that's what luxury is all about. So it's actually an opportunity to make sure we communicate that. And it's interesting because Siddhartha was saying, I'm in the store every day because I feel very strongly that in times of crisis, I have to be with the team on the floor. And it's also a great opportunity to make sure that we learn from what we do on a day-to-day basis. And to some extent, we had lost some of that. Because we had some easy traffic, I think we forgot how to engage consumers. We forgot how to make them dream. We forgot how to tell them stories. We forgot how to feel pampered. So it's a tough business today, but it's an amazing opportunity to be so much better tomorrow. And then it's also what we had to learn, because some consumers are happy to come back to store, but we also know that some consumers don't want to go back to store. So some will buy online, but we started introducing also that opportunity to buy remotely, which we had never done before. So how do we engage consumers? With the phone, with the different technology, but sell remotely. And we've also, and for client advisors that are used to having people face-to-face, again, it's something new that they have to learn almost overnight. And of course, looking into options like consignment. So now thinking, okay, will consumers be more comfortable if we go to their home? So we are looking into that opportunity to bring product to their home with a client advisor, so that they can try the product, and then they don't have to come to the store if they don't feel like it. And so we've been open now for, I won't say 5 weeks. Clearly, every week is a challenge. For the team, it's important to remain positive, because when we see the trend versus what we used to do, it's tough. When we have days in store and we reopen Saint-Tropez in the south of France at the same time as we reopen Paris, in the first 4 days, we had nobody in store, not one person. So then you have the store manager and the team on the phone, and they're totally depressed. And they're like, no, but I believe it's gonna come, and we're gonna make it work. And let's be creative. How can we start contacting people who are not there? And then I even had the store manager telling me, well, you know what, at some point I went and basically took a client outside of the store and have that person come into the store. Hopefully not being too aggressive. But really, and going back to what Siddhartha was saying, the stores who make it work have store managers who are entrepreneurs. So in the end, they need to believe it is their business. And for me, the beauty of retail and the beauty of luxury retail, but for sure retail, is every client advisor needs to feel they're an entrepreneur. Because in the end, we will only succeed if all of them believe in it, if all of them want to succeed. And as I tell the team regularly, our success is the sum of all of your success. So it's the sum of your businesses. You're all little entrepreneurs of your business, and it's with you that will make it work. I think before letting Siddhartha comment on his experience, for me it was interesting because over the 3 different periods, I've learned a lot about leadership and a different type of leadership. I felt that during the crisis, I over-communicated. I realized that there's so much uncertainty, you need to be close to the team, you need to communicate. It doesn't mean you tell them, I know what's gonna happen, because realistically, I didn't know what was gonna happen. But at least I felt there was this need to show them that we were there for them. They are super important, and they are the reason that we will win or lose in the future. So they are super important. We have some sense of, I told them, we don't know what's going to be tomorrow, but let's work on scenarios, and so we can be ready for anything that happens. So at least giving them some sense of, we'll come out of this crisis and we'll find a way to make it work. Beyond over communication, the other thing, and that's something that I strongly believe in, but it's, I felt that you need to be authentic. I fundamentally believe that authentic leadership is the only leadership that can be, but you cannot be fake when things are tough. And sometimes indeed it's showing your weaknesses, but it's also, I mean, really, I think, be yourself and show you are. Third, vision. I've mentioned it, but it's, I felt I had to give them a sense of tomorrow. So we've had to make significant cost cut, as most companies have been doing. So sometimes I feel that I ask the team to be in store and they're almost naked. So how do you give them a sense that we are going to be successful, we're going to make it work, it's going to be tough, but we have a vision of where we're going to go and how. And then last but not least, something that surprised me the most was I went into the crisis with the belief that I had to be super reassuring. And for the first month and a half, I was all about reassuring them. And then we started to think about the reopening. I realized they were so reassured that they almost didn't understand we were in times of crisis. And then I had to change a little bit my speech and say, okay, we're going to make everything to make sure you're safe. But if you're not 100% there, if you don't understand that you will have to go back on the floor and fight, it's not going to work. So it's not business as usual. And literally a week before reopening, I realized I had to share with them or create some sort of burning platform to say, because I had comments like, and we're in France, so for sure that happens a bit more, but we had put strict safety measures in place. And then some people would tell me, well, that means we'll work 15 minutes more per day. And I was thinking, okay, I understand that it's a burden on your well-being. Having said that, at this point, we all need to make some effort to make sure we keep our jobs, we grow the company, and you can all have a job after. And I ended up having to say that when I never thought that's something that I would have to say. So for me, really that balance between reassuring, yet sometimes creating that burning platform was an interesting learning that really came out at the end of the lockdown, which now I don't have to do anymore because I think they're on the floor and they understand, but I felt that to restart the business was something that had to be done. And so now, again, after 5 weeks, we are fighting every day. We have good days, we have bad days, we have good hours, we have bad hours. I have stores that are performing super well, stores that are performing really poorly. There's a really high level of volatility. And the key, and I was talking to my team at headquarters today, is how do we, really keep that vision, keep the belief, be positive while being realistic with the team so that they never give up. In the end, if we start giving up, we won't be successful. So I need everybody to believe that we will come out of it. We will come out of it stronger. And it will be thanks to every single person in the team.
That's Leslie, that's it, listening to you, so many interesting points that you made. And one that is particularly salient for me is this idea of you are in a position where you have already begun to interact with clients, where you're talking about whether you're going and making visits, private visits at their homes, or whether you're arranging a way to clientele on premises or off premises. For me particularly interesting because this also highlights, well, one, it's a location of a very interesting insight as to what the appetite and the psychological makeup of the consumer is going to be in the time ahead, right? Which everybody wants to know. We're all eager to understand because it impacts the way that we operate, it impacts the way that we conceive, design, manufacture, market, sell products. But it's also, I think, interesting for the audience we have here today because it shows, just also the very important difference in a role like yours and a role like mine. We are on so many levels very, very connected in terms of the service that we're delivering to our companies. And yet what's clearly emerging from your points is how operational you have to be and how on the ground you are and how connected to the transaction, to the very edge of that transaction you have to be in order to secure your success. And this, I think, it's for you to confirm, but I think this will be really the success of somebody in your role. And it makes me think then about my own, which is rather abstracted from that transaction point. I have to think about that transaction, but I am several abstractions away from it, where I'm thinking about conceiving product and conceiving marketing and communication, conceiving store and site experience for a global consumer in a sector that's different than luxury, because my company is about a kind of luxury that's much more accessible, right? It sits between the portfolio of an LVMH and the fast fashion high street brands that we all know. It sits in that interesting space. And so, and it's a space, I think, of a lot of opportunity as we move into a post-COVID, hopefully post-social unrest in this country. What does that mean for a company like mine? And it really reminds me of the work that we're doing today, which is around imagining what the world is going to look like and creating a product and creating a business practice that is going to meet that demand. And that is, on the face of it, almost impossible to do, but it can't be, because we have to work. We have lights to turn on, we have stores to operate, we have a website that has to be productive, we have thousands of employees who come to our offices or who come to their Zoom calls every day, needing, wanting to work. So there's a livelihood and a culture and an ecosystem that has to be preserved. And that's not just about profit and loss. It's not just about sustaining a business. It's also about sustaining a culture and sustaining a set of values. I really believe that. But I will say, in terms of my work these past few weeks, and I also think that, just to be conscious of time, we want certainly to give time and space for all of our guests to ask questions. I see a few have come in, and I know that Leslie and I are very keen to answer and be as interactive as we can be here. So I will be very quick and just say that what's interesting about my work right now is thinking about not just the consumer mindset as a subset of what will be a new reality for all of us. And I think as maybe vague as that sounds, my work every day is trying to pin that down, and to pin it down into what I think the user experience on my website should be, what kinds of products I want my design teams to be thinking about, and what kind of value needs to be put into product in the future. Is the equation of value for our kind of product changing? We are providing non-essential goods. It's a subjective question, but we're providing pretty non-essential goods. And so the thinking is, you know, what's happening in the world that is going to affect the matrix of consumption, travel, experience? How do personal values and a new set of values affect the decisions that you're making across all of those marketplaces? And you have to be in tune with the fact that, you know, you look back to look forward. You think about how the market has expanded since the crisis of 2008 and the incredible growth, particularly in companies like LVMH and companies like fast retailing. Our growth has been monumental and almost unprecedented, right? We are coming out of a time where people had a sense of an unlimited movement of people, of products, of ideas. We could get on the plane and go anywhere. We could, product was being, too much product, and product at any level was being developed at a rapid pace to keep up with a perceived demand. And that was built, I think, on this idea of seduction, this idea of needing to seduce a customer. And I think, Leslie, it's probably an element that it's a question of degree. And I'm sure from my own experience in the luxury sector that seduction can never leave that space. Like we have to be seduced by Fendi in order to trade at that price, even if you have the capital. Because there's too much competition. So seduction is key, I think.
It is.
But I would say in my sector, it's not that it's disappearing, but I think and I believe that seduction is moving resolutely into a place of experience. And what might have been an economy, at least in our commodity, of seduction and desire, is moving very quickly, and it has moved already in certain pieces of the fashion sector, to be really about experience and to be about understanding the lifetime value of a product and understanding its function, its utility, its appropriateness in your life. And so I'm very conscious of, you know, after this period of rapid expansion and imagining a new world where, you know, in America, we've effectively confirmed that we're moving into a recession, and you see it and feel it with historic unemployment. What does that mean? Certainly in terms of our business model and how does that react, but what does it really mean in terms of the culture that we're building in our company? And that culture includes what we're making, how much of it we're making, our ability to sell it. But it also, I think, has a lot to do with the content of that product and how that will or will not resonate with a new consumer. And I think that is, from my space, something that I've been thinking a lot about. What does fashion mean after all of this? And it's not that it loses its meaning. It's not that it has to disappear in a space of frivolity. And it doesn't have to be frivolous when you're Christian Dior or Fendi, and it doesn't have to be frivolous when you're Uniqlo. It can be, or Theory, it can be about assuming a new kind of symbolism. It can take a new place in the world. And I don't need to tell this audience, but, you know, masks and hospital gowns and the protection that we are using to address this virus, those are all elements of fashion. And I don't pretend to make too far of a stretch between, you know, an alligator bag at Fendi and a mask, but at the end of the day, they are both indexes of some kind of representation. A choice is being made. And so I think that as a subject, fashion still will be and needs to be important. The question is just, you know, how we will respond and how consumers will feel that response and how they will judge it.
I think it's a great segue to some of the questions that we have. I just before looking into the questions, but I think I'd like to really emphasize what you're saying. I think we have a responsibility before, for sure, delivering financial profit. How do we sustain values? And I think it's a good segue into some of the questions that are around. I think what's happening today is actually accelerating some trends that were already happening. When you talk about experience, for sure, and that's what I tell my team every day, we have beautiful products. I mean, we're super lucky that we have amazing products that are made by craftsmen from Italy, and only Italy. And we're super lucky to have them. There are other brands who have beautiful products as well. So it's the experience in store, it's the experience, the engagement with the client advisor that I think will make the difference. And it's the values that we share with the client. The other trend for me that's accelerating, and that's asking one of the questions, is are we getting more concerned by, are we taking more into consideration environmental considerations? So, and I will let you answer as well, but luxury, what's interesting is, first, luxury, we produce only in Italy. So the question from Nicola, and hi Nicola, so happy to know you're here. We don't produce outside of Italy. So for us, I guess the challenge is, of course, we need to ship goods. I mean, we had 2 weeks where our plant was closed, our factory, sorry, was closed in Italy. Our warehouse was closed. So suddenly we had to, during the lockdown, since Italy was hit pretty bad, we had a challenge with e-commerce because we couldn't deliver from Sesto, where is our warehouse anymore. And we had to, again, almost overnight, think about how can we ship from Hong Kong. So moving good to Hong Kong before we close and be able to ship the world from Hong Kong. So it's being agile. But beyond that, luxury, I mean, was always, I mean, our products are pricey, and they are pricey because they're made by the best craftsmen in the world, because we take the best possible raw materials, where we need to know where they're coming from. We need, I mean, that notion of traceability and environmental consideration was always at the heart of luxury. So I think for me, it's something positive, because it's accelerating a trend where consumers will for sure be more and more demanding than they were before. But I think as luxury brands, we're better positioned than most brands, because that's always the way we did business, except it was so rooted in our DNA that we never felt the need to communicate. So today we're communicating on practices that we have put in place forever. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know how you deal with that, but for me, that's something that's interesting.
It's some really good questions, and especially good because, as Leslie is saying, you know, the system of design and manufacturing at a place like Fendi is very unique and an important counterpoint to the way that we might design and manufacture products at a company like Theory or at a company like Uniqlo. So I would say a few things related to these questions. I can try to answer like maybe two of them at once in a way. Nicolas in Paris has asked a really, really good question about supply chain. And this is a huge subject because there's a few things at stake here. I think there is something around, you know, this is a really important question for the industry at large, which has been set up historically. And by the way, this is an industry which you could very well argue was created in Paris and was created in France, was created in the tradition of the most important, I think, savoir-faire around fashion in the world, which comes from France. But, and if I bring that up, it's not just because we're here with the foundation, it's because you have instilled in that system a value which is immediate between the conception of a product and the way you can make it. And Chanel and Hermès still today valiantly, Louis Vuitton as well, valiantly still produce things in France, which I think is an incredible, incredible thing to be able to do, because the cost of doing that is significant. But it's because clearly these houses have an allegiance and a belief, an allegiance to that system and a belief that the product is excellent because of its makers. It's excellent because of the raw material, but it's excellent because of the hands that make that product. Now, that doesn't not exist in volume when you're dealing with volume. I have the same belief that the factory and the pattern makers and the sewers of my product have to perform at a certain level in order for me to deliver a product at a certain value. So it's not the same as the haute gamme, but it is very linked in the sense that integrity can exist at any place in the spectrum of the marketplace. You can have integrity at Monoprix, you can have integrity at the Bon Marché, the Grande Épicerie. You can have integrity in both spaces, right? So I think you have to have integrity in both spaces if you're going to trade successfully with your consumer. So I think supply chain has been but in the worst examples, the supply chain has been disconnected from the company. And that's where I think Nicola's question is very important, because there are many companies, and I don't want to generalize, but I think the fast fashion, so the trend-driven, high turn, high volume, high waste fashion companies have a divorce between the conception of their product and the making of it, which should be improved. Because when you improve that, it's not just a question of freight and travel and offshore resources or the climate impact that you can affect. It's also that you can better align your supply with the demand. if you are closer to the supply chain and to the industrial complex of your business, you can better meet the need of the customer and the variance in that need. And that variance is not just changing because culture is changing. That variance is changing because last year people wanted jackets and this year people want vests. And that is not an insignificant detail, because it has a huge impact in a supply chain which requires us to take bets on products way in advance. So I think it's a really important question, and maybe I've gone off the deep end, but it's very, very important, and it's linked to these questions of sustainability and traceability, because fashion, I think, can become more responsible in every space. And one way that we've done it at Theory, and we really launched it this spring, was in our 3 core fabrics. We are telling you the story of where they come from. We're telling you the story of the relationship that we have with the farmers who are growing the linen or who are raising the sheep, and how the raw material is harvested humanely, where and how it travels to a mill in Italy where it's woven into a fabric, and therefore how you can understand where your product comes from, that it has a discrete origin point. And we've seen, I can tell you, in just a matter of 3 months, a remarkable reaction in our marketplace to these products. One, because they have integrity and the customer is used to and is expecting that quality, but also because I think we've been able to, and you know, at Theory, our products are not as fashion driven as they are at Fendi. At Theory, we've been able to take more essential products and distinguish them not through decoration, not through silhouette, but we've been able to distinguish them through their traceability.
I think there's also a question on the fact that many brands, and actually it was a pretty impressive, took a position after the death of George Floyd. And some were criticized because their position felt fake. I don't know whether you want to respond to that or whether I should.
It's a very, very hot subject.
I mean, for me, one thing that I will just say, I think in luxury, and I talked about the topic at the Women's Forum last year, but the concept was, can exclusivity be inclusive? What's interesting about luxury is, contrary to the image that we give in terms of workforce, we are probably more inclusive than most industries, for a very selfish reason maybe, but we have consumers from all over the world. So when you go into a store, any luxury brand, you will find client advisor from all over the world, literally all over the world. So I think, again, I tend to feel that it's rooted in our DNA to be inclusive and to welcome diversity. Then and for me, taking a stand on what has happened makes sense, because again, it is part of the way we believe business should be done. I mean, we sell all over the world. We have, in any given countries, employees from all over the world. So again, creativity comes from having diverse team. So I think we fundamentally believe in diversity and the power of diversity. So taking a stand on that atrocious event, for me, and at least maybe if I talk only for the brand that I know, was probably because we fundamentally believe in that. But it's true that it could have been perceived as a commercial act. But I don't think it was, at least for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a super complex subject that Emeline, Christophe, I think we need a separate webinar for that subject. But I do think that Leslie, I totally agree with you. And I would say, here's the thing. It's why Leslie and I wanted to speak a bit, and we didn't really get into it, but we mentioned it earlier on. It's why we wanted to speak about values and governance, right? We wanted to talk about governance because the governance of our organizations, it's not that it wasn't important yesterday, but it is critically important today. And it's critically important that we are doing diagnostics on that governance to understand whether it is as comprehensive as it needs to be with the culture, the cultural temperature of today. We don't decide the cultural temperature. We did not decide that the tipping point of race in America, because it's a tipping point. George Floyd is a tragic story, but it is also a symbolic story of a threshold that was reached. And there are many other deaths that preceded his. And it's not just about individuals who died. It's about a culture which is embedded with certain ideas that needed to move forward, that needed to progress. And so that tipping point as a company has to be addressed, because yes, we can be seen as insincere, and there will be people, this is another question from Nicolas, who has such good questions. Yes, it's possible that we could be seen as insincere, but what could be worse is that we could be seen as indifferent. What could be worse is that we could be silent. And so I prefer that there are people who challenge me and who make me as a company better, stronger, more authentic, more true to my word, more progressive, than that I just opt out of the conversation because of pressure. And so I think, and I'm sure this is the same for you, Leslie, because you are part of an organization with such incredible values and an incredible cultural footprint. Not just an economic footprint, but I think a really important cultural footprint, is that we can do better and we will do better. And it's imperative on us to set the example.
So I know that we're close to the end of the time. So I feel it's almost a beautiful way to end that conversation, unless there are other questions or... Emeline, Val?
Yeah, so I think if we don't have any more questions, I'd just like to say a few words on behalf of the foundations in the US and France to thank you both for speaking so candidly about the challenges facing the fashion industry and your respective companies with us today. One quick note that our next Young Leaders Perspective webinar will be on June 25th. And we'll be talking about the world after COVID with Bertrand Badret of Blue Like an Orange Sustainable Capital and Philippe Manière of Footprint Consultants. And thank you as well to everyone who joined us today, and we look forward to having you all again soon. So bye, everyone.
Thank you.